Aristotle once declared that the soul of woman was incomplete, that she was a deformed male, destined to orbit the masculine, like the moon orbits the Sunday. His words sting even now, echoing through centuries of philosophy, religion, and law. But what if those brutal statements were not simply insults but mirrors? What if they were less about women themselves and more about the terror men carried toward the force they could not control? Because behind Aristotle's judgments lies something far darker, far deeper, the fear of female character, the uncontainable chaos of the feminine psyche. The brutal truths about female character are not about inferiority. They are about raw power, about complexity, about a force so difficult to master that entire civilizations sought to repress it. When Jung looked into the unconscious, he found the archetype of the anima, the feminine soul image, within every man. He realized what Aristotle feared, that the feminine was not weakness, but depth, not submission, but shadow, not fragility, but the very chaos from which creation itself emerges. And chaos is always feared by order. The first brutal truth: female character is shadow and light at once. The feminine psyche holds contradictions without apology. Compassion that can nurture life, and rage that can tear worlds apart. Men and societies try to demand one or the other, the saint or the temptress, the Madonna or the whore, but female character will always be both. To deny either side is to invite destruction, because repression does not kill the shadow, it empowers it. The second brutal truth: female character is terrifying because it cannot be owned. For centuries, women were treated as property, chained in marriage contracts, traded like commodities, but even enslaved bodies carried sovereign souls. No matter how deeply systems tried to cage them, the wildness of the feminine leaked out in myth, in rebellion, in the subversive whisper that cracked empires. Men like Aristotle reduced them in theory because they could not reduce them in truth. The third brutal truth: female character mirrors the weakness of men. That is why so many philosophers painted women as dangerous, irrational, unstable. The instability they saw was often their own shadow reflected back. A man who has not integrated his anima, his inner feminine, will always fear women because they expose what he has denied in himself: vulnerability, emotion, intuition. Female character becomes the scapegoat for the fragility of the masculine ego. The fourth brutal truth: female character disrupts order. Civilizations build laws, rules, and codes to create predictability. But the feminine resists. Her cycles do not obey clocks. Her emotions do not obey logic. Her instincts are older than reason. She does not move in straight lines. She moves in spirals, in tides, in storms. And that terrifies a world built on squares and systems. Yet it is precisely in that disruption that life regenerates, that creativity emerges, that transformation becomes possible. The fifth brutal truth: female character is the archetype of survival. For thousands of years, women carried life in hostile worlds, raising children in times of famine, enduring brutality, adapting endlessly. Survival carved into them a strength that Aristotle and his peers could not comprehend. To the philosopher, survival without conquest looked like weakness. But history proves the opposite women endured when conquerors perished. Survival itself is power. The sixth brutal truth: female character is the abyss men fear. Jung saw it in dreams, the anima as both guide and devourer. She appears as goddess or witch, muse or siren. She offers wisdom, but demands the man's descent into himself. Men fear this abyss because it requires surrender, and surrender feels like death. But without descent into the feminine, the masculine soul remains shallow, brittle, incomplete. Aristotle called it defect. Jung called it necessity. The seventh brutal truth: female character reveals society's hypocrisy. Cultures demand women be pure while worshipping their sexuality in secret. They demand obedience while feeding off their strength. They exalt the mother but condemn the independent woman. They create double standards, not because women are contradictory, but because society is. And female character, simply by existing, exposes the lie. The eighth brutal truth. Female character holds rage as ancient as time. It is the rage of silencing, the rage of erasure, the rage of being defined by others. For centuries, this rage has been demonized. Medusa turned into a monster. Witches burned at the stake, rebels branded mad. But rage, when owned, becomes fuel. Female character carries that fire, and when it erupts, it shatters illusions. The ninth brutal truth. Female character is wholeness disguised as fragmentation. Women are told they are too emotional, too complex, too changeable. But what looks like chaos to a rigid world is actually integration, the ability to hold multiple selves at once, to adapt, to shapeshift, to transform. It is the serpent shedding its skin, the moon shifting its phases, the eternal renewal. What Aristotle called weakness is simply a power he could not categorize. The 10th brutal truth. Female character cannot be destroyed. Philosophers degraded it, religions suppressed it, societies caged it. But it returns again and again, rising in myth, in revolution, in art, in every woman who refuses to vanish. Female character is eternal because it is life itself, chaotic, wild, destructive, creative, uncontainable. You can suppress it, but you cannot kill it, because to kill it would be to kill the very source of existence. So yes, Aristotle was brutal in his words, but perhaps he revealed more than he intended. His dismissal was fear, his reduction was confession, his philosophy was shadow, and Jung showed us why. The feminine is not defect, but depth, not incompleteness, but infinity. The brutal truths about female character are not chains, they are revelations. And once you see them, you cannot unsee. You realize that female character is not weak, not inferior, not unstable. It is the mirror, the abyss, the storm, the fire. It is the very chaos that births the light. And that chaos does not ask for permission. It does not apologize. It does not bow to philosophers, kings, or gods. It simply is, and it will outlast them all. The first brutal truth. Female character is shadow and light at once. We live in a world obsessed with purity. Men are told to be strong without weakness. Leaders are told to be decisive without doubt. Women are told to be nurturing without rage. But real character is not pure. Real character is paradox. The feminine psyche carries both sides without apology. She is mother and destroyer, lover and warrior, saint and seductress. To the shallow mind, this looks like contradiction. To the awakened, it is wholeness. Look at mythology. The goddess Kali, black-skinned and blood-soaked, tongue-lolling, garlanded with skulls, she terrifies the weak because she represents the feminine as both life-giver and death-bringer. She births and she ends, she nurtures and she devours. Western philosophy has no category for this. Aristotle wanted order, taxonomy, neat definitions. But the feminine refuses. She will not be placed in boxes. She will hold opposites until the box shatters. And this is what frightens men and societies most, because she embodies what they deny, the union of shadow and light. Men are trained to exile their shadow, to repress vulnerability, to deny emotion. And so when they meet women who embody contradictions freely, they project fear, resentment, control. They call women irrational, emotional, unstable. But these are only accusations made by fragmented men against integrated women. The truth is brutal. The feminine teaches by embodying what men cannot face in themselves. She carries her darkness on her sleeve. She bleeds every month in reminder that creation demands pain. She holds grief, rage, ecstasy, and tenderness in a single body. This is not weakness. This is mastery of duality. And Aristotle could not see it because his philosophy was blind to paradox. The second brutal truth. Female character is terrifying because it cannot be owned. For millennia, men tried to own women's bodies. Fathers traded daughters. Husbands claimed wives. Kings took concubines. Religions codified obedience. But ownership is always an illusion. A woman may be caged physically, but her psyche remains sovereign. History proves it. Every empire that tried to subjugate women saw rebellion rise in forms they could not predict. Women carried secret knowledge in midwifery and medicine, in whispers of herbal cures, in songs that kept histories alive when men burned the books. They encoded resistance in lullabies, in rituals, in storytelling. The fear of unowned women still drives society today. Notice how language betrays it. Taken, owned, kept, ours. These are the words of fear, the desperate attempt to contain what cannot be contained. Jung would call it projection, the masculine fear of being powerless in the face of the feminine's unyielding mystery. Aristotle called women defective men. But if they were defective, why did men spend centuries building entire structures just to contain them? You do not build cages for the weak. You build cages for lions. The third brutal truth. Female character mirrors the weakness of men. This is why philosophy is full of contradictions. On one hand, Aristotle calls women inferior. On the other, he warns of their cunning, their capacity to deceive, their ability to destabilize men. Which is it? Inferior or dangerous? The answer is projection. What men feared in women were the very qualities they buried in themselves. They buried their vulnerability, so they called women too sensitive. They buried their intuition, so they called women irrational. They buried their dependence, so they called women needy. The mirror is brutal because it exposes what the ego refuses to admit. This is why the feminine archetype is always double-edged. She appears as muse, inspiring creation, or as temptress, leading men astray. She is either the source of his greatness or the root of his downfall. But the truth is simpler. She is only reflecting him back to himself. What he has integrated, she amplifies. What he denies, she exposes. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." The feminine abyss is exactly that. She is not the weakness of man, she is the mirror of his incompleteness. And for a man unprepared to see himself, nothing is more terrifying. The fourth brutal truth. Female character disrupts order. Civilization worships order. Calendars, laws, schedules, hierarchies, systems, everything neatly divided, everything classified. Aristotle himself was obsessed with categorization, labeling animals, ranking humans, dividing reality into structures. But female character defies such order. Her very biology disrupts it. Menstruation follows its own rhythm, indifferent to calendars. Pregnancy bends time into cycles of its own. Her moods shift with tides, her body with seasons. She embodies the eternal truth that life cannot be caged in perfect straight lines. This is why societies demonized witches. Witches represented the feminine alignment with nature cycles, chaos, intuition, the refusal of man's rigid order. Burning them was not about morality. It was about fear. Fear that chaos cannot be controlled. Fear that the feminine will remind men that their laws are not eternal, but fragile. Yet, disruption is not destruction. It is renewal. Order without disruption becomes tyranny. A river must flood to replenish soil. Forests must burn to regrow stronger. Female character disrupts because without disruption, life would wither. She is chaos not as enemy, but as catalyst. The fifth brutal truth. Female character is the archetype of survival. Aristotle could not see it. To him, survival without conquest was weakness. He praised the man who builds empires, who shapes the polis, who rules. But the feminine, across centuries, survived in ways the masculine never could. History is silent about it, but silence itself is proof. Who carried children through famine? Who kept families alive while men fell in war? Who adapted when empires collapsed? It was women. Survival is their inheritance. Not the survival of brute force, but the survival of adaptation, intuition, cunning. Think of Sparta. Men were warriors, trained for death. But when the city fell, it was the women who preserved the culture, who carried rituals, who raised the next generation in exile. Or consider slavery in the Americas. Women kept songs alive, disguised knowledge of healing plants in whispered recipes, braided maps into their children's hair. Where men broke, women endured. And endurance is not passive. Endurance is power disguised as silence. The female psyche holds this brutal truth. Survival itself is victory. The sixth brutal truth. Female character is the abyss men fear. Jung saw her in dreams. The anima appearing as mother, lover, witch, goddess. She is not a person but a force. She is the guide into the unconscious, the one who demands descent. And that is why men fear her, because descent means surrender. Descent means loss of control. Descent means entering chaos. The masculine ego is built on order, on conquest, on mastery. The feminine abyss laughs at mastery. She whispers, "You are not in control. You never were." That is why myth is full of sirens, enchantresses, devouring mothers. The Odyssey's Circe, who turns men into swine. The sirens, whose song lures sailors to their deaths. Medusa, whose gaze petrifies. These are not warnings about women themselves. They are warnings about the terror men feel when confronted with their unconscious through the feminine. Aristotle called women unstable, irrational, but what he named irrational was simply the abyss, the depth he refused to enter. The brutal truth is this: the feminine is not the abyss itself. She is the gateway to it, and without passing through, no man becomes whole. The seventh brutal truth: female character reveals society's hypocrisy. Society worships women as mothers, yet punishes them for desiring independence. It demands purity while exploiting sexuality. It praises strong women while punishing them for threatening fragile systems. This hypocrisy is ancient. Aristotle himself argued that women should remain silent in politics, confined to the household. Yet Greek tragedies, the very theater of his culture, are full of women who move the story. Antigone defying the king, Clytemnestra avenging her daughter, Medea burning everything down. Greek men wanted silent wives in the home, but their collective unconscious gave birth to women on stage who spoke, who killed, who commanded fate. That is the brutal truth. Female character exposes the lie. Every law that cages her is proof of fear, every double standard proof of contradiction. She is the mirror held up to culture, showing it the gap between what it preaches and what it practices. The eighth brutal truth: female character holds rage as ancient as time. This rage is not mere anger. It is generational. It is the scream of silencing, the centuries of erasure, the centuries of being told she was defect, shadow property. It is rage stored in bloodlines, carried in silence until it erupts. Myth remembers it. Medea kills her children in vengeance. The Furies hunt down men who shed kin blood. Even in Christianity, Eve's defiance is cast as the fall of man, and yet beneath that condemnation is a whisper: her refusal to obey birth knowledge. Rage is not only destruction. Rage is awakening. Jung would say this rage belongs to the shadow, and only when integrated can it transform from poison into fire. Female character holds that fire. When repressed, it becomes bitterness, despair, manipulation. But when owned, It becomes a force of justice, a force of creation, a refusal to kneel ever again. The ninth brutal truth. Female character is wholeness disguised as fragmentation. Men call women emotional, inconsistent, chaotic, but what they call chaos is simply the ability to hold many selves at once, to be mother and warrior, lover and leader, nurturer and destroyer, all without dissolving. Jung saw this as integration. The feminine carries complexity openly. She shifts, adapts, transforms, shedding skins like serpents, rising like the moon through phases. What looks inconsistent to the masculine eye is in fact cyclical renewal. This is why female character confuses rigid thinkers like Aristotle. He wanted neat categories, male as rational, female as irrational, but the feminine refuses binaries. She is paradox incarnate. To call her fragmented is blindness. She is whole in a way the masculine ego cannot comprehend. The 10th brutal truth. Female character cannot be destroyed. Philosophers dismissed her. Religions demonized her. Societies caged her. And yet she remains. She rises in every generation, in every myth retold, in every rebellion whispered. You can suppress her, but you cannot kill her, because she is life itself. Even in death, she regenerates. Burn the witch, and her name becomes legend. Silence her voice, and her story leaks through cracks. Call her weak, and she survives when conquerors fall. The brutal truth is simple. Female character is eternal because it is archetype, not individual. It is not one woman, it is woman. Aristotle's words may have echoed through history, but they are dust compared to the chaos he feared. For the feminine does not bow to philosophers. She does not dissolve with systems. She does not end with empires. She is older than them all, and she will outlast them all. Aristotle said woman is defective man. But what is more defective, the one who holds chaos and life in her hands, or the one who fears it so much that he must rewrite reality to deny it? His words are not truth. They are confession, a man declaring his fear of what he cannot master. For the feminine is not defect. The feminine is depth, and depth frightens the shallow. Think of water. Men build ships, armies, empires. They march across land, they write laws, they shape order. But the sea laughs at order. It swallows ships whole, drowns armies, erases coastlines. It cannot be ruled. It can only be respected. That is the feminine. She is not the battlefield. She is the ocean itself. You can march across her surface, but sooner or later she will pull you under, demand you learn her depths. This is why philosophers like Aristotle spoke of women as irrational. What they meant was, we cannot predict them, we cannot control them, we cannot fit them into our systems. To the rigid mind, unpredictability looks like madness. But it is not madness, it is freedom. And freedom terrifies those who need control. This is why history is full of cages for women. Not just physical cages, though there were many, but psychological cages. Myths that define women as temptresses, sinners, defects. Stories designed to make them believe the lie, to cut themselves down before they ever rose. Chains forged in language. But here is the brutal paradox. The more you cage the feminine, the stronger she becomes. Burn her as a witch, and she becomes immortalized in story. Silence her in philosophy, and she rises in myth. Cage her in laws, and she whispers rebellion in lullabies. The feminine psyche survives precisely because it cannot be eradicated. It regenerates, like nature itself, like the moon that vanishes only to return, like the serpent that sheds its skin only to grow sharper. And this is what Carl Jung uncovered. The anima, the inner feminine that lives within every man, the muse, the goddess, the shadow, the guide. She appears in dreams because she cannot be suppressed. She calls to him because he is incomplete without her. Men fear her outside because they fear her inside. That is the abyss. To integrate the anima, a man must face his shadow, his vulnerability, his emotion, his chaos, and most refuse. So they project it outward, blaming women for what they cannot face in themselves. That projection is the root of Aristotle's words, the root of every dismissal, every cage. But projection is a mirror, and mirrors are merciless. This is why female character remains brutal to confront. She does not flatter the ego. She exposes it. She does not soothe illusions. She destroys them. She is not a muse who whispers comfort. She is the abyss who whispers, "Come and face yourself." And that demand is unbearable for those who have never descended. Look at history's myths again. Pandora, who opens the box and unleashes chaos into the world. Eve, who tastes the fruit and plunges humanity into knowledge and exile. Medusa, who petrifies men with her gaze. These are not warnings about women. They are warnings about the feminine power to break illusions, to force confrontation, to tear apart the fragile shells men call order. And what is the response? Demonize them. Make Pandora foolish. Make Eve sinful. Make Medusa monstrous. Turn chaos into defect. Turn depth into danger. And in doing so, reveal the fear that birthed it all. Because the feminine does not apologize. She bleeds and still rises. She is silenced and still speaks. She is killed and still returns. No philosophy, no empire, no theology has ever erased her. Not Aristotle, not Rome, not Christianity, not modernity. She remains, and that is the most brutal truth of all. Female character is eternal. You can bury her. She will grow roots. You can silence her. She will become a song. You can burn her. She will become flame. Because she is not simply woman. She is archetype. She is nature. She is chaos. She is survival. She is wholeness. She is the soul itself. Aristotle called woman incomplete, defective, irrational. But what he feared was not defect, it was power. What he named irrational was not weakness, it was depth. What he called incomplete was in fact infinity. His words echo not as truth, but as confession. The confession of a man terrified by what he could not categorize, control, or possess. And history carried that fear like a torch, burning witches, silencing prophets, caging voices. But every fire meant to destroy the feminine only revealed her immortality. Every silence became song. Every chain became symbol. Every dismissal became mirror. Carl Jung knew what Aristotle could not admit, that the feminine is not secondary, not defect, not absence, but archetype, eternal, unavoidable. She is the abyss in which man finds his soul. She is the chaos that renews order. She is the shadow that reveals the self. The brutal truths remain. She is both light and dark, owned by no one, mirror of fragility, disruptor of order, archetype of survival, abyss of transformation, exposer of hypocrisy, vessel of ancient rage, wholeness disguised as chaos, eternal beyond destruction. And so the lesson is this: fear her if you must, suppress her if you dare, deny her if you are blind. But know this: she will remain. She will return. She will rise in every myth, every rebellion, every generation that refuses to bow. Aristotle's words are dust. The feminine he feared is not. She endures. She outlives philosophers, kings, and empires, because she is not opinion, not doctrine, not theory. She is life itself. And life does not ask for permission. It burns, it disrupts, it creates, it endures. That is the brutal truth about female character. And it will outlast them all.